Michael Fox, and this is the Prospector Podcast. And I have a special guest today. I have Iain Thompson, a partner of Ernst and Young Accounting. Welcome to the podcast, Iain.
Thank you, Michael. Super excited to be here with you today.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about the data that you've uncovered for British Columbia. But before we get into it, if people aren't familiar what Ernst and Young is, let's give them a quick overview of what the firm is.
Sure. So Ernst & Young is a services company, global services company, have a significant presence here in Canada and also in BC. For those of you that don't know us, we provide assurance. So that'll be audit and risk-based services for our clients. We support many of our clients with tax services. We support transactional work all the way through the transactional life cycle. And then we provide management and technology consulting services to our clients. And a large portion and investment in those services is spent in the mining sector, only because the mining sector is such a critical part of our economy here in Canada.
Wonderful. Now, your role within Ernst & Young, you're the lead counsel of the metals and mining practice of the firm for the entire country. And as such, your team has created a report on the BC mineral and coal exploration industry for 2024, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So let's go through the report and what it's telling us.
Sure, Michael. So as you put it, we've been doing this report. My team have been doing this report for the last 9 years. It's something that we do in order to contribute to the sector here in BC. So it's something we do in collaboration with the ministry as well as AME BC in pulling it together. And really the purpose of the report is to create a trend of data and insights in terms of the health of exploration within our province. And the goal of that is obviously to publish the data so that stakeholders from all different parts who have an interest in mineral exploration and mining in British Columbia can look and understand what's happening in the province.
Wonderful. And the data didn't look particularly good in 2024. It was the second year of decline in exploration investment that has gone into the province of British Columbia, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct. And if we look globally, it's been a challenging time for exploration. I believe in our report, we indicate that globally, our understanding is that exploration is down 7%. But one of the interesting things that's specific to the Canadian context is we saw for the second year in a row, BC exploration spend declining. It was down 23% year over year. And when we looked at the other provinces, we noticed that some of them, if not many of them, actually bucked that global trend in the dollar. So if you take time to look at the report outside this podcast, you'll see some of those numbers and some interesting observations, which I'm sure we'll continue to discuss today around what's potentially driving that.
Yeah, let's take a look at what is driving that. One of the takeaways that I gravitated to that seemed to be in the report was that British Columbia over the last decade have had a number of very good mining projects that are starting now to mature, and they're going from being exploration projects to being actual mines. And as a result of that, they're having to spend less money on exploration and more on infrastructure and construction, which doesn't get included in your report. Is that like one of the takeaways that we should be getting from this?
Correct. I think if we kind of step back a bit and we think about exploration overall, is there's going to be a number of drivers, and it's a very complex environment in terms of what drives that investment. One of the observations we do make is that we have seen up until 2 years ago a significant increase in exploration in the province, and we've seen the discovery and the development of a number of really important mining projects for British Columbia, but we've also obviously had to view that through the transition, as you've just put it, into the life cycle of mining. I think the key here, as we look at the report in the context, is what are we doing to continue to build that pipeline of future projects, which is why it's important to look at grassroots and early exploration and what's happening within that space, because of the lead times and the importance. Because resources, as I'm sure your audience knows, resources are depleted, which means you need to replace them, which means you have to have a pipeline of future projects and future investments to maintain the health of mining in our province. And obviously that's then tied to our role in terms of critical minerals and the energy transition.
Yeah, now you mentioned the other provinces, and I suspect places like Saskatchewan, Ontario, Quebec, which have been kind of ahead of the game on looking for critical metals. They're the ones that have been bucking the trend. BC was a bit of a latecomer, but are we seeing any of shifts going away from precious metals and copper to more critical metals in British Columbia in the data that's coming out?
Yeah, sure. So we have seen the other provinces put in place specific incentive policies around just looking to drive up their exploration. And we do ask the question in the report, what role has that played in them bucking the trend? Obviously, as I stated previously, there are a number of other drivers in terms of what resources are in the ground, et cetera, and other pieces. We also probably need to note that we did, in terms of BC increasing its spend historically, there were some investments historically that the government made in infrastructure within BC that drove up some investment. But specifically to BC, we have, which I think is a positive finding in the report, seen an increase specifically in the area of critical minerals, with the exception of copper, which is also a critical mineral. An increase in that, and as I'm sure many of your listeners are aware, there are federal policies around trying to drive incentives for critical mineral exploration across all provinces that likely contributed to some of that focus, as well as global demand for those minerals.
Okay, but the majority of the exploration dollars are still going up into that northwest corner of British Columbia, which is gold, silver, and copper focused, correct? Or is it starting to move into the mid-range where it's copper and nickel?
Yeah, so it's interesting because obviously, just to the nature of our deposits, we quite often see many of our projects that do report sometimes switch between gold and copper, just in terms of how they report. So sometimes we've had some challenges historically around that data, but yeah, a large portion of the investment is still going into that region, the Golden Triangle, right?
Going forward, given the increased interest in these critical metals and everybody looking for them in order to solve the green energy challenges that we're facing as a planet, do you see that as being a good turning point for the BC industry, given that we do have an abundance of other things besides gold and silver, to start to see these exploration numbers go forward again? Because it's not typical for us to, as you mentioned, there were 2 years of decline, but it's not typical for us to kind of go 3 years in decline before we start to turn a corner. So is 2025 and critical metals going to help us do that?
Look, I'm always positive, and I think many of us that work in the sector, if we weren't positive and didn't have positive outlooks, we probably wouldn't be in the sector. I think that's one of the reasons why we stay as kind of internal optimists. But there's a few factors here, right? Firstly, BC, as you put it, we have the right environment to play our role in contributing globally to the energy transition and the need for critical minerals. So we have it, and we have an opportunity to play a role. But we do need to compete globally for capital. And in many ways, the way that investments, or the way I look at it, investments are put through in order to develop these resources to ultimately become projects and then mines, is you need to create an environment that encourages risk taking, because you don't just get to the resource in the mine in the ground and mine it. There is a lot of work that goes in and a lot of investment, and the risk profile across that sits as very high in terms of where those dollars come in, specifically at the grassroots and early stages, and you're competing globally for capital on that basis. So we as I guess federally and then provincially need to think through how we create the right environment and what certain risks we can mitigate for investors in order for them to come into our province and drive the appropriate amount of investment, so that we can play the role we need to play globally in contributing to that, to the critical minerals that are needed for the energy transition. Because if we don't, there's a likelihood that there might be those investments will flow to other jurisdictions that have different risks than those risks you will have in British Columbia. And some of those might be environmental risks and other things, but from an investment portfolio on an overall basis in terms of the return on investment, because people do need to make money from their investments in minerals, and the capital is going to flow to those markets. And fairly recently, we've seen countries, and unrelated to my previous comments around environmental, but we've seen countries like Saudi Arabia really pushing, and New Zealand even really pushing different narratives and different messaging around trying to encourage investment into resources within their jurisdictions and putting a hyper focus on it.
How much of a role would inflation play in the reduction of exploration going on in British Columbia? I understand from a grassroots level, drilling costs in BC have gone up substantially. Is that playing a role in some of the investment, in that it's cheaper to explore in other jurisdictions, so some of the BC projects are going back burner?
Yeah, I think like everything, it's complex, right? So firstly, the foundation is, what is the view of the opportunity that sits in the ground and the optimism that sits around that, right? And then if you have two equal jurisdictions that have the same opportunity, but it costs more to drill in one than the other, you're going to go to the one with the lower jurisdiction, because you're going to get more bang for your buck in terms of being able to pull out core samples and further your project, right? So there are multiple factors involved, but that is certainly a factor that you've got to think of in terms of where you would put your dollars if all other things were equal. So I think you have to consider inflation. And I'm not saying that's specific to BC, because I haven't done a comparison on total drilling cost per spend in other jurisdictions. All we do in our report is note that from a BC perspective, we've seen that number go up significantly.
Okay, and some headwinds cropped up in BC last year. There was a court ruling, almost a year ago, actually, whereby it put some challenges up to the current staking regimen that the BC has in place, and a judge had ruled that the government needed to come up with a new strategy in order to have full consultation dealt with before staking could occur. Is there any indication that court ruling pulled back some of that newer exploration dollars from going out and as we refer to it in our business, kicking rocks out in the field because of question marks around the staking issue?
Yeah, Michael, I think you're referring to, I think it was 2023 that ruling came out in BC in terms of revamping the minerals claim system. Look, that comes into effect, as I understand it, March 26th, so fairly shortly here in British Columbia. Look, I think the general response from the sector, and this is not an EY view, this is more kind of feedback from the sector to that, is that will create administrative burden and slow permitting. And obviously, when you're competing for capital globally, that's going to be viewed as an additional risk, I guess, in terms of those investment dollars. But we do have, specific complexities here in British Columbia that need to be addressed too around that. So there's a balance there, Michael, from my perspective. But I think just generally in terms of the way that that's been perceived from the sector is that it does add a little bit of risk when compared to other jurisdictions that don't have those. But many jurisdictions are, have various different challenges in terms of stakeholder engagement across the board, and that's a normal for us within the sector too. And it's something that we need to do right.
Okay, so there wasn't any sort of indication this was having effect in your 2024 data then?
No, but I mean, the data was down overall, but we didn't draw a specific relation between this. And also, as I say, people may have a perception of complexity in the future, which may hold back. But I've also heard the counter of that from various people that they were trying to move quickly in terms of staking to get ahead of the ruling too. So I don't have a definitive linkage between those two things. But, worth asking the question, I guess, so that we can get these things right.
Yeah, well, definitely it is a bit of an elephant in the room, but it might be one that's just sitting in the corner waiting to make problems or leave the room. So you never know, but data never lies. So we ask these questions. So what I'd like you to do now, Iain, is I'd like you to take a look at the data and the trends and everything that you've seen from year to year in that data and suggest what 2025 and beyond is going to actually look like for the province of British Columbia and its mining sector.
Sure. So, I'm always, as I said, optimistic, Michael. I probably have a lot of bias because of the importance of mineral exploration and mineral development to the province and to the province of the economy. My bias is driven primarily by the need that if we don't, if we don't continue to progress in this area, then we lose what is a critical contributor to our economy here in BC. So I just set that up to say, individually, I have a lot of bias and enthusiasm around where this is going to go. I would say historically, we've been doing the report for 9 years. We saw a 2-year decline back in 2015, 2016. That was driven, if I recall, by global economic factors. We then saw year-over-year increases right up until 2022. And then we've seen a 2-year decline again. So a 3-year decline would be the biggest decline we've had over the 9 years of the report. And that would be concerning. But I do think the macro, take the tariffs aside, take, what the potential impact on that is on the global economy. We do need critical minerals to support the demand for the energy transition, which continues to move forward rapidly. And that is only going to drive up demand. So I think if we get a number of factors right in terms of that risk profile from a province perspective, we have the resources in the ground and we should get the investment, but it won't come without the right focus, messaging and encouragement around saying BC is open for mineral exploration and to push that agenda.
So if I'm paraphrasing you here, but if I'm reading between the lines of all this, yeah, we've been down for the last couple of years, but the industry itself remains healthy.
Yeah, correct. And I think we have an opportunity and we need to take advantage of that opportunity because it's important. And I keep coming back to that, to a fundamental point, which is we need to play our role and contribute to what needs to happen globally around the energy transition. And we can contribute positively if we create the right environment for it. And at the end of the day, we have significant competitive advantages in BC around things like our power, right, which is primarily hydro. It makes us an attractive jurisdiction. We have really good environmental standards, etc. So we can do this right and contribute a lot. So if we get this right.
That's well said. I like the view that the opportunity is greater than the challenges that we're facing, and the future itself for the industry looks very bright. I am going to put a link to to a copy of the full report that you guys did, so anybody that wants to dig in deeper with the numbers and the analysis and everything than what we were able to do today, they're going to be able to dig in and have a look at that. And I look forward to having you on again as we see next year's numbers, and we can draw another picture of what the industry looks like in British Columbia.
Perfect. And between now and then, let's do the real work and get those drill holes in the ground, and let's find some good deposits here in BC.
Wonderful. Thanks very much for your time, Iain.
Thanks, Michael. Thank you for your time.
The Prospector News podcast is for educational purposes only. The opinions expressed are those of the participants and are not to be taken as investment advice. Listeners need to do their own due diligence and seek advice of a licensed investment advisor.